Welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Z-Files, where we will now take a close look at places in our solar system where the sun has never shone and yet oceans still exist. These are quiet, hidden worlds, covered in ice and resting in the dark. We will visit them together, on a slow and gentle journey with our guide as the science that indicates the conditions to support life are present in those places. Part 1. Hidden oceans at the edge of the sun's reach. For a long time, scientists assumed that life needed sunlight. It seemed like a reasonable assumption. On Earth, almost every food chain traces back, eventually, to a plant or organism that captured light and turned it into energy. The sun felt like the starting point for everything. Then we began looking more carefully at the outer solar system, and that assumption started to soften. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn are cold places. Some of them are so far from the sun that sunlight arrives there as little more than a faint glow, hundreds of times weaker than what we feel on a warm afternoon. For decades, scientists imagined these moons as frozen, geologically dead, permanently still. What we found instead was something far more interesting. Beneath the icy surfaces of several of these moons, there appear to be liquid oceans. Not small pockets of slush, but full, deep bodies of water. Oceans that may have existed for billions of years. Oceans that, in some cases, hold more liquid water than all of Earth's oceans combined. This is one of the quieter revolutions in planetary science. It happened gradually, over decades, built from small pieces of evidence gathered by spacecraft flying past worlds we had barely begun to understand. Enceladus is one of the smallest of Saturn's moons. It is only about 500 kilometers across, which makes it roughly the size of the state of Arizona. For most of the 20th century, it was considered unremarkable. A small, icy body in the outer solar system, probably frozen solid, probably geologically inert. When the Cassini spacecraft arrived at Saturn in 2004 and began making close passes of Enceladus, the picture changed. Scientists noticed that the south polar region of the Moon was warmer than it should be. Much warmer. There were long, parallel cracks in the ice near the South Pole, informally called tiger stripes, and from these cracks, something was being expelled into space. Plumes. Enormous jets of water vapor and ice particles, spraying upward from beneath the surface and out into the vacuum of space. Cassini flew directly through these plumes and sampled what was in them. The results were remarkable. The plumes contained water, yes, but also organic molecules, silica particles, molecular hydrogen, and traces of carbon dioxide and methane. Each of those ingredients carries meaning. The silica particles suggested that liquid water deep inside the Moon was interacting with hot rock at high temperature, a process similar to what happens at hydrothermal vents on Earth's ocean floor. The molecular hydrogen pointed to ongoing chemical reactions between water and minerals, a process called serpentinization, which releases energy that certain microbes on Earth use to survive without sunlight. The organic molecules suggested that the basic chemistry of life was present. None of this proves life exists inside Enceladus. That is important to say clearly. What it does suggest is that the conditions we associate with habitability, liquid water, a chemical energy source, the raw materials for organic chemistry, appear to be present there right now. That is a quietly remarkable thing. Europa is Jupiter's moon, a little smaller than our own moon, and it has been a subject of scientific fascination since Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 passed through the Jovian system in 1979. The images those spacecraft returned showed a surface that was strange. The ice was cracked and refrozen in patterns that made geologists think of sea ice on Earth. There were almost no impact craters, which suggested the surface was geologically young, resurfaced regularly by activity from below. Later observations, particularly from the Galileo spacecraft in the 1990s and early 2000s, added to the picture. Magnetometers aboard Galileo detected fluctuations in the magnetic field around Europa that were best explained by a conducting layer beneath the surface, most likely a salty liquid ocean. Gravity data pointed to the same conclusion. The ocean beneath Europa's ice may be 100 kilometers deep, which is roughly 10 times the average depth of Earth's oceans. These findings, gathered carefully over years, shifted the way scientists think about where life might exist. It had been reasonable to assume that planets with liquid water on their surfaces, places bathed in sunlight, warmed to comfortable temperatures, were the most likely homes for life. The ocean worlds of the outer solar system suggest that the universe may have many more strategies than we imagined. Liquid water beneath ice, in the dark, warmed not by a star but by the interior of a world, fed not by sunlight but by chemistry, may be not an exception but a pattern. That thought, held gently, is worth sitting with for a moment. The universe may be full of hidden oceans, and some of them may not be empty. There is something calming about that possibility, not because it resolves any great question, but because it reminds us that the universe is larger and more varied than our assumptions tend to suggest. The darkness is not empty. The cold is not final. And the search for life, quiet and patient as it is, continues. Let us move now from the evidence itself to the question of how these oceans stay liquid at all, so far from the warmth of the sun. Part 2. What keeps the water from freezing? It is a fair question to ask. These moons sit at enormous distances from the sun. Enceladus orbits Saturn at about 1.4 billion kilometers from the Sun. Europa orbits Jupiter at roughly 780 million kilometers. At those distances, temperatures on the surface drop to around -200 degrees Celsius, sometimes colder. And yet, beneath the ice, liquid water persists. The answer involves several mechanisms working together, and understanding them makes the existence of these oceans feel less like a mystery and more like a natural consequence of physics. The most important of these mechanisms is tidal heating. To understand it, imagine squeezing a rubber ball repeatedly in your hand. The ball warms up slightly as you do this, because the mechanical energy of squeezing is converted into heat. Something similar happens to these icy moons, but the squeezing force is gravity. Enceladus and Europa do not orbit their parent planets in perfectly circular paths. Their orbits are slightly elliptical, meaning that the distance between the Moon and its planet changes continuously as the Moon travels around. As that distance changes, the gravitational pull on the Moon changes too, stretching and compressing the Moon's interior in a rhythmic way. This flexing generates heat through friction. In the case of Enceladus, the amount of heat produced this way is substantial. Scientists estimate that Enceladus radiates roughly 15 to 16 gigawatts of heat from its south polar region alone, which is comparable to a significant number of large power stations running simultaneously. This tidal heating is driven partly by the gravitational interaction between Enceladus and its neighboring moons, which keep its orbit from circularizing and thus maintain the flexing over geological time. A similar resonance relationship exists for Europa with its neighbors Io and Ganymede in the Jovian system. Tidal heating alone may not account for everything. Radiogenic heating also plays a role. Radioactive elements within the rocky cores of these moons decay slowly over time, releasing heat as they do. This is the same process that warms Earth's interior, and while the effect diminishes as these elements decay over billions of years, it still contributes meaningfully to keeping the interior warm. Then there is chemistry. Liquid water can remain liquid at temperatures below its normal freezing point when it contains dissolved salts or other compounds. Seawater on Earth freezes at a slightly lower temperature than pure water for this reason. If the oceans of Enceladus or Europa are salty, as evidence suggests they may be, the freezing point of that water is lower than pure water, which helps keep it liquid even in a cold environment. There are also compounds called clathrates, structures where molecules of one substance are trapped inside a lattice of another. Methane clathrates and other forms can affect how ice behaves under pressure and temperature, and they may play a role in insulating these subsurface oceans from the cold above. The ice shell itself acts as insulation. The outer layers of ice on Europa, estimated to be somewhere between 10 and 30 kilometers thick depending on the region and the model, are poor conductors of heat. Heat from below dissipates slowly through them, which helps maintain the liquid layer underneath. What emerges from all of this is not a fragile or unlikely scenario. It is a set of physical processes, well understood and well documented, working together to maintain an environment that, from the outside, appears completely hostile but is, from the inside, sustained and persistent. This matters because it broadens the concept of the habitable zone. For a long time, the habitable zone around a star was defined as the range of distances at which liquid water could exist on a planet's surface. Too close, and the water evaporates. Too far, and it freezes. Earth sits comfortably within this zone for our Sun. The traditional view implied that habitable worlds were relatively rare, confined to a narrow band around each star. The ocean worlds of the outer solar system suggest a different view. A moon can be far outside the classical habitable zone and still harbor liquid water, provided it has the right combination of tidal forces, chemistry, and internal heat. This means that the number of potentially habitable environments in any given planetary system may be much larger than previously assumed. And across the galaxy, the implications of that shift are considerable. Part 3. The Tiger Stripes and What They Tell Us. There is something visually arresting about the south pole of Enceladus, even seen only in spacecraft images. Most of the moon is a relatively smooth, pale surface, bright white and cold. But the south polar region is different. It is crossed by 4 long, roughly parallel fractures, each one several kilometers wide and running for about 130 kilometers in length. They are spaced evenly, almost as if drawn by hand, and they are surrounded by ridges of displaced ice that suggest enormous internal pressure over time. These are the Tiger Stripes, formerly known as sulci, and they are the most geologically active features we have yet found in the outer solar system. From them, Enceladus exhales. The plumes that emerge from these fractures are not subtle. Cassini photographed them clearly against the darkness of space during flybys, long bright streaks of water vapor and fine ice particles rising from the surface and spreading outward. Some of this material falls back to the Moon as snow. Some of it escapes entirely, feeding a diffuse ring of material around Saturn known as the E ring. Enceladus, in effect, is continuously replenishing one of Saturn's rings from its own interior. When Cassini flew directly through the plumes, the spacecraft's instruments gathered a detailed chemical inventory of what was being released. Water vapor made up the majority of the material, as expected. But there were also carbon dioxide, methane, molecular nitrogen, and a range of organic compounds, including some that were relatively complex. There were silica nanoparticles, tiny grains formed when hot water interacts with silicate rock at specific temperatures, which place constraints on the conditions deep inside the Moon. The silica grains most consistent with what Cassini detected form in water at temperatures above 90 degrees Celsius, at pressures found at depth. This implied active hydrothermal processes occurring at or near the rocky seafloor of the subsurface ocean. Perhaps most significant was the detection of molecular hydrogen in the plumes. Molecular hydrogen, in this context, is a byproduct of serpentinization, a chemical reaction in which water interacts with iron and magnesium-rich rocks and converts them, releasing hydrogen gas in the process. On Earth, serpentinization occurs at mid-ocean ridge systems and at hydrothermal vent fields, and the hydrogen produced there serves as an energy source for certain communities of microorganisms that do not depend on sunlight at all. These are called chemolithotrophs, a word that simply means organisms that obtain energy from inorganic chemical reactions rather than from light or organic material. The presence of molecular hydrogen in the Enceladus plumes suggests that a similar energy source may be available in its ocean. Not just liquid water, not just organic chemistry, but a ready supply of chemical energy in a form that life, as we understand it, knows how to use. There is a useful way to think about this. Imagine a battery. Life needs two things that a battery also needs: a source of electrons and somewhere for those electrons to go. The difference in chemical potential between the hydrogen-rich water near a hydrothermal vent and the more oxidized water further away creates exactly that kind of gradient. It is a slow, steady, geochemically maintained battery. On Earth, it powers entire ecosystems in the deep ocean. The question for Enceladus is whether anything is drawing on that battery. Cassini also detected traces of phosphorus compounds in the plume material, announced in 2023 based on reanalysis of the spacecraft's data. Phosphorus is one of the key elements for life as we know it, essential for the construction of DNA and cell membranes. Its presence in the plume material means that at least 6 of the elements considered most important for Earth-like biochemistry — carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur — appear to be present in the Enceladus system. None of these detections are proof of life. They are, rather, a checklist being quietly filled in. Each confirmed ingredient narrows the gap between what we know and what we wonder. The tiger stripes themselves continue to be geologically active. Temperature maps from Cassini showed that the fractures are warmer than their surroundings, consistent with heat escaping from below. The activity is not uniform. Some sections of the fractures are more active than others, and the intensity of the plumes appears to vary as Enceladus moves through different points in its orbit, consistent with the tidal flexing that drives the heating. The fractures open and close slightly as the Moon is squeezed and relaxed by Saturn's gravity, and it is during the opening phase that the most material is released. This tidally pulsed activity means that Enceladus is, in a sense, breathing in rhythm with its orbit. There is something almost meditative about that image. A small icy moon, circling a ringed giant, exhaling gently into space on a schedule set by gravity, on a cycle that has continued, likely, for millions of years. The plumes also offer a rare opportunity in planetary science. They bring the interior of the ocean to the surface without requiring any spacecraft to land or drill. A well-equipped orbiter, or ideally a mission that passes through the plume multiple times at low speed, could sample the ocean's chemistry directly from space. Several mission concepts of exactly this kind have been proposed and studied in recent years. Let us move now from the plumes to the broader ocean beneath them, and consider what that ocean might be like to inhabit. Part 4. An ocean in the dark. Imagine, for a moment, descending, not through sunlit water, but through something much quieter and much colder. You pass first through the ice, kilometers of it, ancient and compressed. The light fades immediately. There is no gradual dimming here, no transition from blue to green to black as there is in Earth's ocean. The ice is not transparent to any useful degree. It is simply dark from the beginning. Then the ice gives way to water. The transition might be gradual or abrupt depending on where you cross it, and we do not yet know enough to say with certainty which. But somewhere beneath the kilometers of ice, there is liquid water, and that water extends downward for a very long way. The subsurface ocean of Enceladus is estimated to be around 10 kilometers deep on average, perhaps deeper beneath the south polar region where the ice above is thinner and the heat from below is greater. The ocean of Europa may be 100 kilometers deep. These are large volumes. Europa's ocean likely contains roughly twice the total volume of liquid water found on Earth. These oceans are under pressure. Water kilometers deep is compressed by the weight above it, and on Europa, where the ocean is so deep, the pressure at the seafloor may be 130 to 170 times the atmospheric pressure at Earth's surface. That is similar to the deepest trenches on Earth, where life nevertheless thrives. Pressure alone does not prevent life. Life on Earth has adapted to extraordinary pressure at depth, using proteins and membranes that remain functional in ways that would damage organisms accustomed to the surface. The temperature of these subsurface oceans is uncertain, but they are almost certainly cold in most regions. Near the ice above, temperatures likely hover just above freezing. Near the seafloor, especially at hydrothermal vent sites, temperatures could be considerably higher, perhaps well above 100 degrees Celsius in localized regions, though the pressure prevents boiling. Salinity is another important variable. The plume data from Enceladus suggests that the ocean contains dissolved salts, probably sodium chloride and sodium carbonate among others. The presence of carbonate ions, in particular, would make the ocean moderately alkaline, with a pH that may be similar to or higher than that of seawater on Earth. An alkaline chemistry is actually favorable for certain kinds of prebiotic reactions and has been proposed as a productive environment for the origin of life. Some researchers have drawn comparisons to the Lost City hydrothermal field in the Atlantic Ocean on Earth, a system driven not by volcanic heat but by serpentinization, where alkaline fluids mix with the cooler seawater and support a modest but persistent community of microbial life. The seafloor of these oceans, if there is an active hydrothermal system, would be a place of contrast. Cold, dark water above. Warm mineral-rich water emerging from vents or diffusely through porous rock below. Plumes of heated fluid rising and mixing. Chemical gradients forming and dissolving. In that mixing zone, the conditions for chemistry are favorable. On Earth, hydrothermal vent communities include not just bacteria and archaea, but animals, tube worms, shrimp, crabs, and fish that have all adapted to life without sunlight. These communities depend ultimately on the chemical energy maintained by the vents. They are independent of the surface biosphere in a meaningful way. They would survive, at least for a geological eye blink, if the sun were turned off. This is not speculation. It is observed. The equivalent on Enceladus or Europa would presumably be simpler. We have no reason to expect animals. The timescales and the constraints are very different. But microbial life, if it arose in such an environment, would not require sunlight, would not require a surface, and would not require any exchange with the outside universe. It could persist in complete isolation, cycling through the chemistry available to it, for as long as the heat and the water held. That is a long time. Enceladus has likely had a liquid ocean for hundreds of millions of years, possibly longer. Europa's ocean may be even older. On Earth, life appeared relatively quickly after liquid water became available, within several 100 million years of the planet's formation, at least by some estimates. Whether that pace has any universal meaning is deeply uncertain. But the ocean worlds give life, if it ever started there, a long time to persist. The darkness of these oceans is worth lingering on for a moment. We associate darkness with emptiness, with absence. But on Earth, the deep ocean is not empty. It is inhabited all the way to the bottom, by organisms that generate their own light, or that have given up on light entirely and navigate by chemistry and pressure and vibration. The darkness is simply a different kind of environment, not a hostile one, just different. The same may be true beneath the ice of Europa or Enceladus. The darkness may be, in its own way, full. And now, let us consider how we know any of this at all, and what the instruments of planetary science can actually detect from millions of kilometers away. Part 5. Reading a world from a distance. There is something quietly impressive about the methods planetary scientists use to study these distant moons. No one has gone there. No probe has drilled through the ice. No camera has photographed the seafloor. And yet we have a reasonable, evidence-based picture of what lies beneath, assembled from data gathered during brief flybys or from spacecraft in orbit. The tools available are indirect, but they are not vague. They are precise in their own ways, and they constrain what is possible with real rigor. Gravity measurements are among the most powerful of these tools. Every body with mass has a gravitational field, and that field varies in subtle ways depending on how the mass is distributed inside the body. A moon with a dense rocky core surrounded by a liquid layer surrounded by ice will produce a slightly different gravitational signature than one that is uniform solid ice all the way through. By tracking the trajectory of a spacecraft very precisely as it flies past or orbits a moon, scientists can detect tiny changes in the craft's speed caused by variations in gravity. From these variations, they reconstruct the interior structure of the Moon. For Europa, gravity data gathered by the Galileo spacecraft indicated a differentiated interior, a rocky core, a liquid layer, and an outer ice shell. The moment of inertia derived from the gravity data was inconsistent with a uniform solid body and strongly suggested a layered structure with a less dense outer region. Liquid water, being less dense than rock but more dense than ice, fits the intermediate layer. Magnetic induction is another key tool. Jupiter and Saturn generate enormous magnetic fields, and these fields vary in direction and strength as a moon orbits within them. A moon that contains a layer of electrically conductive material, such as salty liquid water, will generate its own secondary magnetic field in response to the changing external field. This is induction, the same principle behind electric transformers, operating on a planetary scale. The Galileo spacecraft carried a magnetometer, an instrument that measures magnetic field strength and direction, and during its flybys of Europa, it detected exactly this kind of induced magnetic signature. The signal was consistent with a layer of conductive material near the surface, covering the entire Moon globally. Solid ice is not a good conductor. Salty liquid water is. The induced magnetic field at Europa pointed clearly to a global ocean. Similar magnetic induction signatures have been detected at Ganymede, another of Jupiter's moons, and at Callisto. This means that the subsurface ocean phenomenon is not unique to Europa. It appears to be a pattern across multiple moons of Jupiter alone. Spectroscopy is a third important method. When sunlight or other radiation interacts with a surface or a gas, different chemical compounds absorb or reflect specific wavelengths of light. By analyzing the spectrum of light coming from a moon's surface or its ejected material, scientists can identify the chemical fingerprints of different compounds. This is how the organic molecules, salts, and water vapor in the Enceladus plumes were characterized by Cassini's instruments. It is also how the surface chemistry of Europa has been partially mapped, revealing the presence of salts and sulfur compounds that may have been delivered from the ocean below. Geodesy, the study of the shape and rotation of a body, offers yet another line of evidence. If Europa has a liquid ocean beneath its ice, the ice shell is decoupled from the rocky interior. It can slide independently, rotating at a slightly different rate. Observations of surface features over time can detect this shell rotation. Some analyses of Galileo data suggested that Europa's surface has indeed rotated relative to its interior, which is consistent with a decoupled ice shell floating on liquid water. The measurements are difficult and the interpretation is debated, but the evidence is suggestive. Thermal imaging provides information about heat flow. Cassini's instruments mapped the temperature of Enceladus's surface in detail, revealing the anomalous warmth of the tiger stripes and helping to quantify the heat escaping from the interior. Comparing the measured heat output with models of tidal and radiogenic heating constrains how active the interior must be and what processes are likely driving it. Each of these methods works differently, probes different properties, and carries its own uncertainties. But when multiple independent methods all point in the same direction, the convergent conclusion becomes much harder to dismiss. For Europa, gravity data, magnetic induction, surface geology, and spectroscopy all suggest an ocean. For Enceladus, the plumes themselves add direct chemical sampling to the picture. This is how planetary science builds a case. Not with a single dramatic revelation, but with a patient accumulation of consistent signals, each one speaking a slightly different language, all of them gradually saying the same thing. The Europa Clipper spacecraft, launched in October 2024, is currently en route to Jupiter and will conduct dozens of close flybys of Europa beginning around 2030. It carries 9 scientific instruments, including a magnetometer, a gravity science experiment, an ice-penetrating radar system, spectrometers, and cameras. The radar, in particular, may be able to detect the ice-water interface from above, giving us a much clearer measurement of ice thickness and ocean depth. The mission is designed to assess Europa's habitability in detail, not just to confirm the ocean exists, but to characterize it well enough to plan future missions. There is a kind of patience embedded in this work that feels worth acknowledging. The scientists who designed Europa Clipper began their careers knowing they might not see results until late in them. The measurements were planned over years, the spacecraft built over more years, the journey itself takes years. Planetary science operates on human timescales stretched thin, careful, and deliberate, moving toward answers that only reveal themselves slowly. There is something calming in that pace. It mirrors the unhurried scale of the objects being studied, worlds that have held their oceans for hundreds of millions of years and will hold them still, long after any particular mission has ended. Part 6. The Many Oceans of the Outer Solar System. It would be easy to think of Enceladus and Europa as exceptional cases, rare flukes in an otherwise frozen outer solar system. The evidence suggests otherwise. As our instruments have improved and our understanding of planetary interiors has deepened, subsurface oceans have turned up in more and more places. They are beginning to look less like anomalies and more like a standard feature of large icy moons. Ganymede is Jupiter's largest moon, and the largest moon in the solar system. It is bigger than the planet Mercury. For a long time it was thought to be geologically quiet, a frozen relic. But magnetic induction data from Galileo, later confirmed and refined by the Juno spacecraft, pointed to a global subsurface ocean sitting between layers of ice at depth. Ganymede's interior appears to be layered like a parfait, a rocky core, then a layer of denser ice under pressure, then a liquid ocean, then a more familiar ice shell at the surface. The ocean may be very deep and very salty, sandwiched between ice layers rather than resting directly on rock. This means Ganymede's ocean may have less direct contact with its rocky core than Europa's, which has implications for the chemistry available and the likelihood of hydrothermal activity. It is still a remarkable environment, but it is a different kind of remarkable. Callisto, the outermost of Jupiter's 4 large moons, also shows signs of an induced magnetic field consistent with a liquid layer. Callisto is the most heavily cratered surface in the solar system, suggesting very little geological activity over its history. And yet the magnetic data hints at a conducting layer within. The evidence is less definitive than for Europa or Ganymede, and the source of heat that would maintain a liquid layer is less obvious for Callisto, since it sits outside the resonance chains that drive tidal heating in the other moons. Radiogenic heating from its rocky interior, combined with antifreeze compounds dissolved in the water, may be sufficient. The situation remains open. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, is in many ways the most Earth-like body in the solar system aside from Earth itself. It has a thick nitrogen atmosphere. It has lakes and rivers and rain, though these are made of liquid methane rather than water. But beneath its surface, models and Cassini gravity data suggest the presence of a subsurface water ocean, probably mixed with ammonia, which acts as an antifreeze and could keep water liquid at temperatures where pure water would freeze. Titan's ocean is likely deep, separated from the surface by a thick layer of ice, and it may be in contact with a rocky core. The Dragonfly mission, a rotorcraft lander planned to arrive at Titan in the 2030s, will study the surface chemistry of Titan in detail, though its primary goal is the organic chemistry of the surface rather than the subsurface ocean directly. Triton is Neptune's largest moon, and it orbits Neptune in the wrong direction, which is one piece of evidence that it was captured from the outer solar system rather than formed alongside its planet. It has geysers, observed by Voyager 2 during its 1989 flyby, dark plumes rising from the surface driven by solar heating of subsurface nitrogen ice. Whether Triton has a liquid water ocean beneath its surface is uncertain, but its captured origin means it likely experienced tremendous tidal heating as its orbit was circularized after capture, which would have kept its interior warm for a long period. Some models suggest a liquid layer may persist, but we have very limited data. Pluto, visited by New Horizons in 2015, showed signs of a possible subsurface ocean in its geologically young terrain, including a large smooth basin called Sputnik Planitia that appears to have been shaped partly by the movement of material within a liquid layer. The evidence is indirect and modeling dependent, but it suggests that even objects at the very edge of the classical solar system may harbor liquid water. The broader picture that emerges is one of abundance. Subsurface oceans appear to be present in at least 4 of Jupiter's moons, at least 2 of Saturn's, possibly in Triton, and possibly in Pluto. The combined volume of liquid water in these bodies likely vastly exceeds the total liquid water on Earth's surface. If you were to count only liquid water in the solar system and not ice or vapor, the majority of it may well reside underground on these distant moons rather than on the surface of our own planet. That realization, taken quietly, has a way of reorienting things. Earth's surface oceans, vast as they seem to us, may be a small portion of the liquid water in our solar system. The ocean worlds are not exceptional. They are, by volume and perhaps by number, the rule. And if that is true here, it is worth asking what it means for the rest of the galaxy, which is where we are heading next. Part 7. What the galaxy might hold. Our solar system contains 8 planets and a large collection of moons, dwarf planets, and smaller bodies. It is one system among an estimated 200 to 400 billion star systems in the Milky Way alone. Beyond our galaxy, the observable universe contains hundreds of billions of galaxies. The numbers are large enough to become abstract, so it is more useful to focus on what we can actually say about the prevalence of ocean worlds beyond our solar system. The study of planets orbiting other stars, called exoplanet science, has grown enormously since the early 1990s when the first confirmed exoplanets were detected. As of the mid-2020s, several thousand exoplanets have been confirmed, with many thousands more candidates awaiting confirmation. The techniques used to detect them, primarily the transit method, in which a planet passing in front of its star causes a small dimming of the starlight, and the radial velocity method, in which the planet's gravity causes a measurable wobble in the star's motion, tend to favor the detection of large planets orbiting close to their stars. Smaller, more distant worlds are harder to detect with current technology. What these surveys have shown is that planets are common. Nearly every star that has been studied carefully enough appears to host at least one planet. Rocky planets, sometimes called terrestrial planets, appear to be particularly abundant. Estimates suggest that the Milky Way alone contains tens of billions of rocky planets in the classical habitable zones of their stars. But the ocean worlds of our own solar system suggest that the classical habitable zone is not the only place to look. Moons of gas giant planets orbiting far from their stars can have subsurface oceans if they experience tidal heating. Gas giant planets are common in exoplanet surveys. Many of them orbit their stars at distances comparable to or greater than Jupiter's distance from our Sun. These planets could plausibly host large moons, and those moons could plausibly have subsurface oceans maintained by tidal forces. We cannot yet detect exomoons directly in most cases, though a few tantalizing candidates have been reported. The technology to confirm them reliably does not yet exist for small or distant objects. But the reasoning is straightforward. If large moons are common around gas giants, and if tidal heating is a reliable mechanism for maintaining liquid water, then subsurface ocean moons may be extraordinarily numerous across the galaxy. There is another class of worlds worth mentioning here. These are sometimes called ocean planets or water worlds, hypothetical planets composed largely of water, with deep global oceans on their surfaces rather than thin layers over rock. Some exoplanets detected so far, particularly those in the size range between Earth and Neptune, sometimes called super-Earths or mini-Neptunes, may be water-rich worlds. If so, their surfaces may be covered by deep oceans, though under conditions very different from Earth, including much higher pressures and possibly high-pressure ice phases at great depth. Whether such environments are hospitable to life is genuinely uncertain, but the existence of such worlds, if confirmed, would add yet another category of potentially habitable environment. The detection of biosignatures, chemical or physical signs of life, in the atmospheres of exoplanets is one of the main goals of current and future telescope missions. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched at the end of 2021, can analyze the light passing through an exoplanet's atmosphere during transits and identify certain molecules. Finding oxygen, methane, and water together in particular ratios would be suggestive, though not conclusive, of biological activity. Several rocky planets in nearby systems are being studied in this way. But for subsurface ocean worlds, this approach has limitations. Life in a subsurface ocean, sealed beneath kilometers of ice, would have limited ability to alter a planet's atmosphere in detectable ways. The connection between the ocean and the surface would need to be active, as it is on Enceladus through its plumes, for any biosignatures to escape into space where they might be detected. A truly sealed ice world might harbor abundant life and show no atmospheric sign of it at all. This is a sobering thought, but it is also a reminder that our detection methods are shaped by our assumptions. We look for signs of life that resemble the signs we know from Earth's surface biosphere. Life sealed in an icy ocean might leave a very different kind of trace, or none at all that we can currently detect. The absence of a detectable signal is not the same as absence of life. It is simply the limit of our instruments and our imagination. The vastness of the galaxy, combined with the apparent commonality of water and the robustness of subsurface ocean mechanisms, suggests quietly that the question of life elsewhere may eventually resolve itself not into a dramatic single discovery but into a gradual statistical picture. a universe in which life, or at least habitable environments, are distributed widely, in places we are only beginning to learn to look. That is worth holding gently, as we rest in the thought of all those hidden seas. Part 8. Life without sunlight, Earth's deep lessons. If we want to understand what life in a subsurface ocean might look like, the best place to start is not in the outer solar system. It is here on Earth, in the deep ocean and the deep crust, where life persists in conditions that once seemed impossible. The discovery of deep-sea hydrothermal vents in 1977 was one of the most genuinely surprising moments in modern biology. A submersible exploring the seafloor near the Galapagos Islands descended into complete darkness and came upon fields of warm water rising from the ocean floor, surrounded by an abundance of life. Tube worms several meters long, ghostly white crabs, dense mats of bacteria. A thriving ecosystem in a place where no sunlight had ever reached and where the chemistry was, by surface standards, harsh and unusual. These communities are supported not by photosynthesis but by chemosynthesis. Certain bacteria and archaea at the base of these food webs draw energy from the chemical reactions occurring at the vents, particularly the oxidation of hydrogen sulfide and the reaction between hydrogen and carbon dioxide. They fix carbon and produce organic matter without any input of solar energy. They are, in a meaningful sense, running on the Earth's internal heat rather than the sun's light. Since that discovery, deep-sea vent communities have been found across the world's oceans, at mid-ocean ridges, in back-arc basins, at cold seeps where methane bubbles up from below. Each one is slightly different in its chemistry and its inhabitants, but all share the fundamental property of operating on geochemical energy rather than sunlight. More recently, scientists have explored what is sometimes called the deep biosphere, the community of microbial life living not on the seafloor but within the rock and sediment below it. Drilling programs and mine surveys have found living microorganisms kilometers below the surface of the Earth, in temperatures that approach or exceed 100 degrees Celsius, under immense pressure, with almost no access to organic material from the surface. These organisms, mostly bacteria and archaea, metabolize extremely slowly. Some of them may divide only once every 1,000 years or more. Their metabolic rate is so low that it barely registers against the background chemistry of the rock they inhabit. And yet they are alive, and they have apparently been alive in these conditions for a very long time. The deep biosphere may contain a significant fraction of all microbial life on Earth by number, though by mass and metabolic activity it is dwarfed by surface life. Estimates of the total biomass of the deep biosphere have varied widely and are genuinely uncertain, but even conservative figures suggest it is substantial. It represents a domain of life that operates largely independently of the sun, sustained by the slow chemistry of rock and water interacting over geological time. For the ocean worlds of the outer solar system, these Earth analogues are directly relevant. The chemosynthetic communities at hydrothermal vents demonstrate that complex, structured ecosystems can exist without sunlight, organized around chemical energy gradients of the kind that appear to exist in the Enceladus and Europa oceans. The deep biosphere demonstrates that life can persist in extremely cold, high-pressure, low-nutrient environments, metabolizing so slowly as to be nearly invisible by our usual standards for geological timescales. There is also a specific and well-studied environment on Earth that has become something of a model for Europa in particular. Lake Vostok is a large subglacial lake in Antarctica, buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. It has been isolated from the surface for an estimated 15 to 25 million years. Despite this isolation, drilling and analysis of ice cores above the lake, and later direct sampling of water from the lake itself, have revealed evidence of microbial life. The organisms found there are adapted to cold, darkness, high pressure, and low nutrients. They are not abundant, but they are present, and they are diverse enough to suggest a functioning, if minimal, ecosystem. Other Antarctic subglacial lakes have since been explored with similar results. Lake Whillans, beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, was found to contain a community of chemosynthetic microorganisms living on the energy produced by the weathering of minerals in the subglacial sediment. Again, no sunlight, no connection to the surface biosphere, just rock, water, cold, and life. These findings matter for the outer solar system because they reduce the gap between what we observe and what we speculate. We are not imagining life in a completely alien context. We are extending, cautiously, patterns that we have already observed on our own planet into environments that share many of the relevant characteristics. The extension is not guaranteed to hold. Life may have originated on Earth under conditions that do not exist in the Enceladus or Europa oceans, and the origin of life and the persistence of life are two different problems. An environment that could sustain microbial life once started may not be an environment in which life could have started in the first place. This distinction matters, and it is one that researchers take seriously. But the possibility remains open, supported by evidence rather than just imagination, and that is enough to keep the question alive and the search ongoing. The deep ocean of Earth, dark and pressurized and full of slow life, offers a kind of quiet encouragement to look deeper and further, and with patience. Part 9. The Chemistry of Possibility. Chemistry is, in many ways, the language of habitability. Before we can ask whether life exists somewhere, we need to ask whether the right chemical conversations are taking place. And in the subsurface oceans of the outer solar system, the evidence suggests that some very interesting chemistry is indeed occurring. The most fundamental requirement is liquid water. Water is an extraordinary solvent. It dissolves more substances than almost any other liquid, which means it can carry and mix the raw materials of chemistry in ways that other liquids cannot easily replicate. It participates directly in many of the reactions central to biology, from the synthesis of proteins to the replication of genetic material. Its properties at different temperatures and pressures are well understood, and life on Earth has exploited those properties with remarkable ingenuity across an enormous range of conditions. Beyond water, life as we know it requires a source of carbon. Carbon is the backbone of organic chemistry, capable of forming long chains and complex structures in ways that no other element matches. The plumes of Enceladus contain organic carbon compounds, some of them relatively simple, like methane and carbon dioxide, and some of them more complex. Cassini's mass spectrometer detected high molecular weight organic molecules in the plume material, compounds with masses above 200 atomic mass units. These are not simple molecules. They are fragments of larger organic structures, possibly broken apart by the energetic processes involved in the plume eruption. Their presence implies that even more complex organic chemistry is occurring in the ocean below. Europa's surface shows spectroscopic evidence of carbon-bearing compounds as well, though the picture is complicated by the intense radiation environment at Europa's surface, which breaks apart and recombines molecules in ways that can obscure the original chemistry. The recently confirmed detection of carbon dioxide on Europa's surface, attributed by some analyses to material originating in the subsurface ocean rather than delivered by external impacts, was an important data point. If carbon from the ocean is reaching the surface, it suggests some degree of exchange between the two environments, which has implications for the availability of chemical ingredients throughout the system. Nitrogen is another element essential to biology, required for the construction of amino acids and nucleic acids. It has been detected in the Enceladus plumes in the form of molecular nitrogen and ammonia. Its abundance and speciation in the ocean are not yet well constrained, but its presence is established. Sulfur is present in the Europa system in abundance, though much of it is delivered externally from the volcanic moon Io, whose sulfur compounds are dispersed throughout Jupiter's magnetosphere and bombard Europa's surface continuously. Whether sulfur in biologically useful forms exists in Europa's ocean is uncertain, but the surface abundance at least establishes that the element is present in the system. The element whose confirmation in the Enceladus system felt particularly significant to many researchers was phosphorus. For a long time it was assumed to be present but had not been directly detected. The 2023 announcement of phosphate detection in Cassini's archived plume data was therefore a meaningful moment. Phosphate, the biologically relevant form of phosphorus, is essential for adenosine triphosphate, the molecule that cells use to store and transfer energy, and for the phosphate backbone of DNA and RNA. Its confirmed presence in the Enceladus ocean completed, at least provisionally, the inventory of the 6 elements most associated with life on Earth. But having the right elements is only part of the story. Chemistry also requires energy to drive reactions forward, and it requires the right conditions of temperature, pH, and pressure for reactions to proceed at useful rates. A cold, dilute solution with all the right ingredients but no energy source will not spontaneously organize itself into biology. The energy source matters enormously. At hydrothermal vents, the energy comes from the chemical disequilibrium between the hot, mineral-rich vent fluids and the cooler, more oxidized surrounding water. This disequilibrium is maintained by the continuous injection of reduced compounds from below, compounds that have not yet reacted with the oxidized water and still carry their potential energy. The reaction between these two chemical regimes releases energy, and life, where it exists, intercepts that energy before it dissipates. For an ocean world to be habitable in a sustained way, it needs a continuous or at least long-lived supply of both reduced compounds from its interior and oxidized compounds produced at or near its surface. On Earth, photosynthesis at the surface produces oxygen and organic matter, which sink to the deep ocean and fuel the vent communities from above, while the vents supply reduced chemicals from below. The two halves of the system are coupled. In a subsurface ocean sealed beneath ice, with no sunlight reaching the water, the surface photosynthesis half of this cycle is absent. Oxidized compounds can still be produced, however, by the radiolysis of water, the splitting of water molecules by radiation from radioactive decay in the rocky interior, and by the processing of surface ice by radiation and ultraviolet light, which produces oxidants that may be transported into the ocean if the ice shell is not completely static. Europa's surface is particularly rich in oxidants produced by radiation from Jupiter's magnetosphere, and if these compounds are being cycled into the ocean below, they could help maintain the chemical disequilibrium that life requires. Whether this oxidant delivery actually occurs at Europa is one of the key questions the Europa Clipper mission is designed to help address. The answer matters not just for Europa but for the broader question of how closed or open these subsurface ocean systems are, and whether the chemistry within them can be sustained over the timescales relevant to the origin and persistence of life. The chemistry of these oceans is complex, uncertain in detail, and still being characterized from great distance. But the broad outlines are encouraging. The ingredients appear to be present. The energy sources appear to be active. The conditions appear to be within the range that life on Earth has demonstrated it can tolerate. Whether any of this has led to life remains the open question, and it is one that no amount of remote sensing can fully resolve. Only a mission capable of directly sampling the ocean, or the life within it, can answer it definitively. That remains a goal for a future that is not yet here, but is perhaps not as far away as it once seemed. Now let us step back from the chemistry itself and consider the broader question of what we mean when we say a place is habitable, and why that concept is more nuanced than it first appears. Part 10. Habitability and its limits. The word habitable gets used frequently in discussions of the outer solar system, and it is worth pausing on what the word actually means, because it carries more complexity than it might suggest at first. In its simplest sense, a habitable environment is one capable of supporting life. But this immediately raises the question: which life, and under what conditions? Life on Earth spans an extraordinary range of tolerances. Organisms called extremophiles thrive in environments that would kill most familiar life forms. There are bacteria that live in extremely acidic water with a pH near 0. There are archaea that grow optimally at temperatures above 120 degrees Celsius. There are organisms that tolerate radiation levels hundreds of times higher than would be lethal to humans. There are microbes living in the hypersaline waters of the Dead Sea, in the dry valleys of Antarctica, in the pores of rocks in the upper atmosphere. The boundaries of life on Earth are much wider than intuition suggests, and those boundaries have expanded every time scientists have looked carefully in a new extreme environment. When planetary scientists assess the habitability of a subsurface ocean, they are therefore not asking whether humans or fish or tubeworms could live there. They are asking whether the environment falls within the range of conditions that microbial life, specifically the kinds of extremophilic bacteria and archaea that represent the hardiest life forms we know of, could survive and reproduce. The relevant parameters are temperature, pressure, pH, salinity, water activity, radiation levels, and the availability of energy and essential elements. Temperature is perhaps the most studied constraint. The upper temperature limit for life, based on known organisms, is around 121 or 122 degrees Celsius, demonstrated by an archaean called Strain 121 that was cultured from a deep-sea hydrothermal vent. At the lower end, life has been found metabolizing at temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius in hypersaline Antarctic brine channels. The subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus likely fall well within this range in most regions, with bulk temperatures probably close to 0 and localized high temperatures near any hydrothermal sites. Pressure is another factor. The high pressures of deep subsurface oceans, up to 170 atmospheres or more on Europa, are within the range tolerated by deep-sea organisms on Earth. Piezophils, organisms adapted to high pressure, have been found in the deepest ocean trenches on Earth, and life appears to be present right down to the maximum depths we can access. pH and salinity are more uncertain for the outer solar system ocean worlds, and here the constraints are less clearly defined. Life on Earth has been found in environments ranging from pH 0 to pH 12.5, a range that covers the plausible estimates for the Enceladus Ocean, which appears to be moderately to strongly alkaline. Very high salinity is more challenging, as high salt concentrations reduce the availability of liquid water to biological molecules, a parameter called water activity. The most extreme halophiles on Earth live in saturated salt solutions, but below this threshold water activity becomes too low for any known life. If the subsurface oceans of these moons are extremely salty, the constraint becomes relevant, though current estimates for Enceladus suggest salinity within the range that life can tolerate. Radiation is a more complex issue. The surface of Europa is bathed in intense radiation from Jupiter's magnetosphere, which would be lethal to most life at the surface. But the ice shell provides shielding, and a few meters of ice are sufficient to reduce radiation to biologically manageable levels. Within the ocean itself, radiation from radioactive decay in the rocky core is present but at low levels, likely insufficient to pose a biological threat and potentially useful as an energy source. There is an important distinction that habitability assessments must respect, and it is one that is easy to blur. An environment being habitable does not mean it is inhabited. It means only that the physical and chemical conditions do not preclude life. Whether life is actually present depends on whether life ever originated there, whether it has had time and opportunity to adapt, and whether it has been able to persist through any changes in the environment over geological time. These are separate questions from habitability, and they are much harder to answer from a distance. Some researchers prefer the concept of a habitable niche, meaning a specific combination of physical and chemical conditions at a specific location within a larger environment, rather than treating the entire ocean as uniformly habitable or not. A vast subsurface ocean might contain only small regions, perhaps near hydrothermal vents, where all the conditions for life are simultaneously met. The rest of the ocean might be too cold, too dilute in energy sources, or too poorly supplied with essential elements to support active life. This spatial heterogeneity matters for thinking about how likely life is to be present and how it might be distributed. The concept of habitability also has a temporal dimension. An environment that is habitable now may not have been habitable in the past, and an environment that was once habitable may have become less so. The ocean of Enceladus is thought to be geologically recent in origin relative to the age of the solar system, though this is debated. If the ocean is younger than the time required for life to originate, that is a significant constraint. If it is old enough, and if other conditions were met early in its history, then the question of current habitability is more open. These nuances do not diminish the significance of these environments. They make the assessment more honest. The subsurface oceans of the outer solar system are genuinely plausible habitats for microbial life, based on the best science available. They are not certainties, and they are not fantasies. They are serious candidates, and that places them in a category occupied by very few other environments beyond Earth. Let us carry that careful optimism forward now, and turn to the missions being planned and built that will bring us closer to actual answers. Part 11. The missions going there. There is a particular kind of anticipation that comes from knowing a spacecraft is already on its way. It is quieter than the excitement of a launch, more patient, more settled. Europa Clipper launched in October 2024 and is now traveling through the inner solar system on a trajectory that will take it past Mars and back past Earth for gravity assists before heading outward to Jupiter. It is expected to enter orbit around Jupiter in 2030, after which it will conduct approximately 50 close flybys of Europa over several years, each one carefully designed to build up a different piece of the picture. The spacecraft carries 9 instruments. The magnetometer will measure Europa's induced magnetic field with much greater precision than Galileo could manage, refining estimates of the ocean's depth and salinity. A gravity science experiment will track the spacecraft's trajectory with extraordinary precision, allowing scientists to map the distribution of mass within Europa and update the interior structure models. An ice-penetrating radar called Reason will send radio waves through the ice shell and listen for reflections, with the goal of detecting the ice-water interface and mapping any regions where the ice is thin or where liquid water may be closer to the surface. A thermal imaging instrument will look for anomalously warm regions that might indicate active geological processes. Cameras and spectrometers will map the surface chemistry and geology in detail, looking for evidence of material exchange between the ocean and the surface. Europa Clipper will not land. It will not drill. It will not directly sample the ocean. But the data it collects will be transformative nonetheless, answering questions about ice thickness, ocean depth, salinity, and surface chemistry that are currently only loosely constrained. And it will help identify the most promising sites for a future lander, if and when such a mission is approved and funded. The European Space Agency's JUICE mission, which stands for Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, launched in April 2023 and is also en route to the Jovian system. Its primary target is Ganymede, around which it will eventually enter orbit, becoming the first spacecraft to orbit a moon other than our own. It will also make flybys of Europa and Callisto. JUICE carries its own magnetometer, gravity science instruments, and spectrometers, and its observations will complement those of Europa Clipper, providing a comparative picture of the multiple ocean worlds in the Jovian system. For Enceladus, no dedicated mission is currently approved, though several have been proposed and studied in detail. The most thoroughly developed of these concepts is a mission sometimes called Enceladus Orbolander, a spacecraft designed to orbit Enceladus and eventually land on its surface, with instruments capable of detecting biosignatures directly in the plume material. The plumes are so accessible that a spacecraft in orbit around Enceladus could fly through them repeatedly, accumulating large samples of ocean material over time. The scientific case for such a mission is widely regarded as strong, and it has been recommended in NASA's Planetary Science Decadal Survey, the community consensus document that sets priorities for the coming decade of missions. As of the mid-2020s, the mission remains in the study phase, awaiting budget decisions. A Titan mission has moved further along. Dragonfly, a rotorcraft lander, was selected by NASA in 2019 and is being developed for launch in the early 2030s and arrival at Titan in the early 2040s. Dragonfly will fly between different surface sites on Titan, studying the organic chemistry of the surface and atmosphere. Its findings will be relevant to understanding prebiotic chemistry, the chemistry that precedes and potentially leads to life, though its direct relevance to the subsurface ocean is indirect. Beyond these approved or seriously studied missions, there are more speculative concepts. A submarine or autonomous underwater vehicle designed to operate in the ocean of Europa or Enceladus has been studied conceptually for years. The technical challenges are formidable. The vehicle would need to be delivered through the ice, either through a melting probe or via a crack or thin region, and would need to navigate and communicate in a closed environment with no GPS and no direct radio contact with Earth. Power would need to come from an onboard nuclear source. Data would need to be relayed through the ice somehow, perhaps via acoustic communication or a tethered relay. None of these challenges are physically impossible, but all of them represent significant engineering problems that have not yet been solved at the required scale. The timeline for such a mission, even in optimistic scenarios, likely extends well into the second half of the 21st century. Getting an orbiter to Europa takes years. Getting a lander to the surface takes more work. Getting a probe through the ice and into the ocean beneath is a further enormous step. Each phase requires the success of the previous one and the development of technology that does not yet fully exist. And yet, the direction of travel is clear. Each mission adds knowledge. Each data set refines the models. Each discovery narrows the uncertainty and sharpens the next set of questions. The path from where we are to a spacecraft in the ocean of Europa or Enceladus is long and technically demanding, but it is a path, and people are walking it. There is something worth sitting with in that image. Somewhere in the dark between the planets, several spacecraft are moving right now, instruments ready, recording the subtle signatures of worlds they have not yet reached. The universe does not hurry. Neither do the machines we send to explore it. Both keep their own time, patient and unhurried, and eventually the distance closes. Part 12. Plumes, Signals, and the Question of Contact. There is a certain elegance to the idea that an ocean world might announce itself. That it might, without any prompting, send material from its interior out into space where passing spacecraft can catch it and analyze it. Enceladus does exactly this. Its plumes are, in a sense, an open invitation, a continuous broadcast from the ocean below directed outward into the void. The scientific value of plumes goes beyond simple chemical sampling. The material in a plume carries information about the physical conditions of its source. The size distribution of ice particles tells scientists something about the temperature and pressure at which they formed. The ratio of different isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen in the water vapor constrains the temperature history of the ocean. The presence or absence of specific organic compounds, and their relative abundances, provides a snapshot of the organic chemistry occurring below. If microbial life were present in the ocean, and if it were abundant enough, its chemical byproducts or even fragments of its cellular material might find their way into the plumes and be detectable by a sufficiently sensitive instrument flying through them. This last possibility is one that mission designers take seriously. The question is not whether a plume sample could contain biosignatures, but whether current or near-future instruments are sensitive enough to detect them at the concentrations likely to be present. Laboratory experiments have shown that even a very dilute biological signal, a small number of bacterial cells or fragments of cell membranes mixed into a large volume of water, can in principle be detected by certain mass spectrometry techniques. The challenge is that the concentrations in a real plume sample may be very low, diluted by the enormous volume of the ocean and the physical processes of plume formation, and distinguishing a genuine biosignature from background organic chemistry is technically demanding. Cassini's instruments were not designed with biosignature detection as a primary goal. They were capable and returned remarkable data, but their sensitivity to complex organic molecules and potential biological markers was limited by the standards of what would be needed for a definitive detection. A dedicated Enceladus mission carrying instruments optimized for biosignature detection, including high-resolution mass spectrometers, would have a meaningfully better chance of finding a biological signal if one is present. Europa's plumes are a more complicated story. Several observations by the Hubble Space Telescope, beginning around 2012, suggested the possible detection of water vapor above Europa's surface, consistent with plume activity. These detections were not always repeatable, and subsequent observations did not consistently confirm them, which has led to genuine uncertainty about whether Europa has active plumes at all, or whether they are intermittent and localized, or whether the Hubble detections were real but reflected transient activity that has since quieted. The scientific community remains cautious, and the consensus is that Europa's plumes, if they exist, are far less consistent and energetic than those of Enceladus. This uncertainty matters for mission planning. If Europa does have active plumes, even intermittently, then a spacecraft in the right place at the right time could sample ocean material without needing to land or drill. If the plumes are absent or undetectable, accessing the ocean requires physically penetrating the ice, which is a much more demanding undertaking. Europa Clipper's observations will help clarify this question, and its thermal and spectroscopic instruments may be able to detect the chemical signatures of any plume activity even if the plumes themselves are too tenuous to image directly. Beyond plumes, there are other ways an ocean world might signal its interior state. The surface geology of an icy moon records the history of forces acting on it from below. Regions where the ice has been disrupted, refrozen, and disrupted again suggest an active and dynamic ocean beneath. On Europa, the chaotic terrain regions, where the surface appears to have been broken into rafts of ice that moved and refroze in new configurations, are thought to reflect episodes in which the ice shell was particularly thin and the ocean below was particularly active. These regions may be places where material exchange between ocean and surface is most likely, and they are among the primary targets for surface investigations. The surface chemistry of Europa also preserves information about the ocean. Salts that have migrated upward through the ice carry the chemical signature of the water they came from. Recent observations by the James Webb Space Telescope detected carbon dioxide on Europa's surface concentrated in a geologically disrupted region called Terra Regio, and the isotopic and chemical characteristics of this carbon dioxide were more consistent with an internal origin than with delivery by external impacts. This suggests that carbon from the ocean has reached the surface in geologically recent times, which implies active exchange and adds to the case that Europa's ocean is chemically connected to its surface in ways that matter for habitability. Each of these signals, plumes, surface chemistry, thermal anomalies, geological disruption, is a partial view of an ocean we cannot yet directly access. Together they build a picture that is incomplete but coherent. The ocean is there. It is active. It is chemically interesting. And it is, in its own quiet way, reaching outward. That reaching is worth noticing. These worlds are not entirely sealed. They communicate, however faintly, with the space around them. And we are, at last, learning to listen. The next question is one that takes us beyond the physical evidence and into something more philosophical, though grounded still in science. It is the question of what finding life in one of these oceans would actually mean. Part 13. What it would mean to find life. Let us imagine, carefully and without drama, that a future mission to Enceladus collects plume material and finds within it something unmistakable. Not a hint, not a suggestive pattern, but a clear biological signature. Cell membranes. Amino acids in the specific ratios produced by living systems. Isotopic fractionations consistent with metabolism. Or even, in a more distant future, images from an underwater probe showing microbial mats on a hydrothermal vent field, kilometers below the ice. What would that mean? The most immediate implication would be a statistical one. If life arose independently in two places within a single solar system, the probability that life is common throughout the universe becomes very high. This is sometimes called the rare Earth hypothesis versus the cosmic ocean hypothesis, a debate about whether the conditions for life are exceptionally unusual or widely distributed. A single confirmed independent origin of life beyond Earth would not resolve all aspects of this debate, but it would shift the weight of evidence dramatically toward the view that life, wherever the conditions are right, tends to appear. The word independently carries significant weight here. If life on Enceladus or Europa were found to share a common ancestor with life on Earth, perhaps transported by meteorites during the early solar system when impacts were frequent and material was regularly exchanged between bodies, the conclusion would be different and somewhat less sweeping. This scenario, called lithopanspermia, is considered plausible by some researchers. Early in the solar system's history, large impacts could have ejected material from Earth or Mars into trajectories that eventually reached the outer solar system, and vice versa. Whether microbial life could survive the journey, the ejection, the transit through space, and the arrival at another world, is uncertain but not impossible, given what we know about the hardiness of some spores and dormant cells. If the life found were genuinely independent in origin, using different biochemical machinery, different amino acids, perhaps even a different genetic encoding system, the implications would be profound and quiet in equal measure. It would suggest that life is not a singular accident that happened once on one warm planet, but a process that chemistry tends to produce when the right conditions are present. It would make the universe feel, in a particular way, more alive. The discovery would also raise immediate practical and ethical questions that are already being considered by researchers and policymakers. Planetary protection guidelines, the rules governing how spacecraft are sterilized to avoid contaminating other worlds with Earth life, and how samples are handled to avoid contaminating Earth with extraterrestrial material, would become enormously more significant. A living ocean world would need to be treated with a kind of care that goes beyond the technical. The question of whether and how to continue exploring an inhabited world, whether the scientific value of further investigation outweighs the risk of disrupting a biosphere that evolved independently for hundreds of millions of years, would be genuine and serious. These are not hypothetical concerns invented for the sake of argument. They are questions that space agencies and researchers have already begun to think through, precisely because the possibility of life in the outer solar system is taken seriously enough to warrant preparation. There is also the scientific question of what any discovered life could teach us. If life in the Enceladus Ocean uses the same basic chemistry as life on Earth, the same amino acids, the same nucleic acids, the same cell membrane lipids, that would suggest that life converges on a narrow set of solutions regardless of where it starts, which would itself be a profound finding. If it uses different chemistry, that would open up an entirely new domain of biology, one that would likely take generations to understand fully, and that would reshape our understanding of what life actually is at its most fundamental level. The discovery would arrive not as a sudden flash, but as a gradual confirmation, a series of measurements that converge on a conclusion, debated and checked and replicated over years. That is how science works. The moment of certainty, if it ever comes, will likely be quiet, a paper published, a press conference attended by scientists who have spent decades preparing for it, a slow dawning in the public consciousness that the universe is different from what we assumed. That quietness seems appropriate. A discovery of that scale deserves to settle in slowly, to be turned over and examined from many angles before its full meaning becomes clear. Some of the most significant realizations in the history of science have been like that. Gradual, patient, arriving not with a shout but with the steady accumulation of evidence until the conclusion becomes undeniable. We have not found that life yet. The oceans remain unvisited, their chemistry only partially characterized, their depths unmeasured. But the possibility is real enough that some of the people thinking about it most carefully are already preparing for what comes post-discovery. That preparation feels like its own kind of quiet confidence. Let us turn to a topic that sits at the edge of this science, linked by the broader question of intelligence and observation in the universe. The phenomena that observers on Earth have reported in the skies above, and what they might or might not have to do with the hidden oceans we have been exploring. Part 14: Unidentified Phenomena and the Scale of the Unknown. The question of life in the universe does not only arise from telescopes pointed at distant moons. It also arises, more unexpectedly and more controversially, from reports of phenomena observed in Earth's own atmosphere. Phenomena that trained observers, including military pilots and radar operators, have described as behaving in ways that are difficult to explain with known technology or natural processes. These reports have accumulated for decades, largely dismissed or set aside by mainstream science, but have in recent years received more formal attention. In 2021, the United States government released a preliminary assessment of what it called unidentified aerial phenomena, acknowledging that a significant number of reported observations could not be explained by known aircraft, weather events, or sensor artifacts. Subsequent hearings and reports have continued this institutional acknowledgement, and NASA convened an independent study team whose 2023 report called for better data collection and a more systematic scientific approach to the subject. It is important to be clear about what this institutional attention does and does not imply. It does not constitute evidence that any of these phenomena represent extraterrestrial technology. The honest position, held by most scientists who have commented on the subject, is that the evidence available is insufficient to draw conclusions about the nature of the phenomena. Many reported observations likely have conventional explanations that were not identified at the time, whether atmospheric optical effects, classified military technology, sensor malfunctions, or simple misidentification of known objects. A smaller number of cases remain unexplained in the sense that available data does not point clearly to any conventional explanation. Unexplained does not mean inexplicable. And it certainly does not mean extraterrestrial. What the phenomenon of unidentified aerial phenomena does do, when considered alongside the science of ocean worlds and the broader search for life, is illustrate the scale of our uncertainty about the universe. We live on a planet that we do not fully understand, in a solar system that continues to surprise us, in a galaxy whose inhabited or uninhabited nature we cannot yet determine. The appropriate response to that uncertainty is not confident assertion in either direction but careful, systematic inquiry carried out with the best available tools. There is a version of the UAP discussion that connects more directly to the ocean worlds. The hypothesis that any technologically advanced civilization, whether in this solar system or beyond, might have originated not on a planetary surface but in a subsurface ocean is occasionally discussed in speculative literature. Such a civilization, if it existed, would face very different technological challenges than surface-dwelling intelligence. The development of radio astronomy, rocketry, or any form of space exploration would require finding ways to penetrate and escape from an ice shell, or to develop technologies in an environment where fire, in the conventional sense, is not available. Whether intelligence of this kind could arise and what form its technology might take are questions that belong firmly to the speculative end of the spectrum. What is less speculative is the broader point that the search for intelligence, like the search for life, may need to expand its assumptions about where and in what form to look. The ocean worlds of the outer solar system have already demonstrated that liquid water and active chemistry can exist in places where intuition would not have placed them. The history of science suggests that our intuitions about where life and intelligence can exist are reliably narrower than the reality turns out to be. The UAP subject is best held lightly, with genuine openness and genuine skepticism in equal measure. The phenomena are real in the sense that credible observers have reported things they could not explain. What those things are remains, for now, genuinely unknown. That is an uncomfortable position, but it is the honest one, and it is the position that science requires when evidence is insufficient for stronger conclusions. What connects UAP to the ocean worlds is not any direct evidentiary link but the shared context of a universe whose full nature we are still discovering. Both subjects remind us, in different ways, that the map of the known is smaller than the territory of the real, and that the edges of the map are worth exploring with care and curiosity rather than with either fear or premature certainty. The ocean beneath the ice of Enceladus does not care whether we find it interesting. It has been there, in the dark, for a very long time. It will be there still when the next mission arrives and the one after that. Its patience is geological, measured in millions of years. Ours is measured in decades, or in the quiet hours of a single night. And yet, measured against the scale of what we are trying to understand, even a few decades of careful looking is a beginning worth making. Part 15. Ice as Armor and Archive. There is a tendency to think of the ice shells covering these ocean worlds as obstacles, barriers that stand between us and the water beneath. From an engineering perspective, that framing has merit. Drilling or melting through kilometers of ice is genuinely difficult. But the ice is also something else. It is a record, a layered archive of everything that has happened at the surface and, in some places, a messenger from the ocean below. Ice preserves. On Earth, the ice cores drilled from the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets have given scientists detailed records of atmospheric composition, temperature, and volcanic activity stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer of ice captures a snapshot of the conditions at the time it formed. The ice shells of Europa and Enceladus, though formed and maintained under very different conditions, carry their own kinds of information. The patterns of fractures, ridges, and disrupted terrain on the surface of Europa record the history of forces acting on the shell from below. The distribution of chemical compounds on the surface reflects both external delivery by impacts and radiation processing and internal delivery from the ocean through cracks and porous regions. Reading that record requires understanding the processes that shaped it. On Europa, the surface is geologically young, estimated at perhaps 40 to 90 million years old on average, which in geological terms is quite recent. This youth implies that the surface is being continuously renewed, with older material being recycled back into the ice shell or the ocean below through a process that may be loosely analogous to plate tectonics, though the mechanics are different. If material from the ocean reaches the surface and is then processed by radiation and subsequently recycled back down into the ocean, the surface acts as a chemical reactor, producing oxidized compounds from ocean material and returning them below. This cycling could be important for maintaining the chemical disequilibrium that habitability requires. Enceladus presents a different situation. Its surface in most regions is extremely young, coated by the snow that falls back from the plumes. The Tiger Stripe region is the most geologically active and the most chemically interesting part of the surface, with the thermal anomalies and the plume sources concentrated there. The rest of the surface is quieter, but even there the coating of plume fallback material provides a sample of what is coming from the ocean, distributed across the Moon like a thin chemical fingerprint. The thickness of the ice shell matters enormously for both science and future exploration. On Europa, estimates of ice thickness range from a few kilometers in the thinnest regions to perhaps 30 kilometers in the thickest, with significant uncertainty. A thinner ice shell implies more dynamic exchange between ocean and surface, more geological activity, and more accessible material from the ocean. It also implies, from an exploration perspective, a shorter distance to drill or melt through to reach the water beneath. The ice-penetrating radar on Europa Clipper, REASON, is specifically designed to constrain ice thickness and identify any regions where liquid water may be present within the ice itself, not just at the base of the shell. Within the ice shell, there may be pockets or lenses of liquid water at shallower depths than the main ocean. These could form when tidal heating is concentrated locally, or when the composition of the ice varies in ways that lower the local melting point. If such liquid pockets exist near the surface, they would be more accessible to future missions and might harbor their own chemical environments, connected to but distinct from the main ocean below. Some models of Europa's surface geology invoke shallow liquid lenses to explain the formation of certain surface features called lenticulae, small dome-like or pit-like features scattered across the surface. The ice also serves as a radiation shield. Europa's surface is subject to intense bombardment by energetic particles from Jupiter's magnetosphere, sufficient to be lethal to any exposed organism and to drive rapid chemical reactions in the surface ice. At a depth of roughly 1 meter, the radiation drops to levels that would not preclude life. At the depth of even a thin ocean, radiation from above is negligible. The ice that looks like an obstacle is also, from the perspective of anything living below, a protective layer that has kept the ocean shielded from the harshest energy in the Jovian system for billions of years. There is something in this dual nature of ice, barrier and protector, obstacle and archive, that feels worth pausing on. The same feature of these worlds that makes them hard to explore is also the feature that has kept their interiors stable and shielded over geological time. The difficulty and the preservation are two aspects of the same thing. What has made these oceans hard to reach has also made them possible to sustain. That quiet irony is one of the more elegant aspects of these worlds. And it is a reminder that the features of an environment that appear limiting from one perspective may appear enabling from another. Let us move now from the ice above to the rock below, because the seafloor of these hidden oceans is, in many ways, where the most interesting chemistry is happening. Part 16. The seafloor we cannot see. We have never seen the seafloor of Europa or Enceladus. No camera has looked there. No instrument has measured its temperature directly. No sample has been taken from it. What we know, or more precisely what we infer, about these seafloors comes from models, from analogy with Earth, and from the chemical signals that rise from them through the water and, in Enceladus's case, out through the ice into space. Despite this distance, the inferences are not weak. The combination of plume chemistry, gravity data, and thermal modeling has given scientists a reasonably coherent picture of what the seafloors of these moons are probably like, at least in broad terms. For Enceladus, the picture is one of active interaction between liquid water and silicate rock. The silica nanoparticles detected in the plumes, as noted earlier, form under specific conditions of temperature and pH that require hot water in contact with rock. This implies hydrothermal circulation, water penetrating into the porous or fractured rocky seafloor, being heated by the tidal and radiogenic energy in the interior, and rising back into the ocean carrying dissolved minerals and gases. This is serpentinization and hydrothermal activity operating in a small world far from the Sun, sustained by nothing more exotic than the physics of orbital resonance and radioactive decay. The seafloor of Enceladus is probably not uniformly active. There are likely regions of more intense hydrothermal activity, perhaps analogous to mid-ocean ridge spreading centers on Earth, and regions that are quieter and cooler. The active regions would be the loci of the most interesting chemistry, the places where the chemical energy gradient is steepest and where the ingredients for complex organic reactions are most concentrated. For Europa, the seafloor situation is less constrained by direct chemical evidence, since Europa does not currently show confirmed plume activity that would allow direct sampling. The seafloor is inferred to be rocky, covered by a layer of sediment that has accumulated over the ocean's history. Whether hydrothermal vents are active there depends on the rate of tidal heating and how it is distributed within the moon's interior. Some models predict significant hydrothermal activity. Others suggest a quieter seafloor with heat dissipated more diffusely. The gravity and thermal data do not currently distinguish clearly between these scenarios, and resolving this uncertainty is one of the key goals of Europa Clipper. A critical question for both moons is whether the seafloor is in direct contact with liquid water, or whether high-pressure ice forms a layer between the water and the rock at the very bottom of the ocean. On Earth, and at the pressures and temperatures likely present in the Europa and Enceladus oceans, liquid water and silicate rock can coexist without an intervening ice layer. But in a very deep ocean under very high pressure, water can freeze into a form called high-pressure ice, which is denser than liquid water and would settle to the seafloor, interposing a layer of ice between the water and the rock and potentially limiting the chemical exchange between the two. For Europa, with its very deep ocean, This is a genuine concern, and models suggest that high-pressure ice phases may be present at depth. For Enceladus, with its shallower ocean, this is less likely to be a significant factor. The presence or absence of direct rock-water contact matters enormously for the chemistry and the potential for life. It is at the rock-water interface that serpentinization occurs. It is there that minerals are dissolved and trace elements are released into the ocean. It is there that the chemical energy gradient is steepest and most sustained. A seafloor insulated by high-pressure ice would be a less reactive and less energetically interesting environment, though not necessarily a dead one. On Earth, even the most remote and geologically quiet parts of the deep seafloor harbor life, sustained by the slow diffusion of organic matter from above and the slow weathering of minerals from below. These communities are sparse and metabolically very slow, but they are present. An analogous situation might exist in the quieter parts of the Europa or Enceladus seafloor, a thin, slow biosphere sustained at the very edge of what chemistry can provide. The mineral composition of the seafloor also matters. Different rock types release different elements when they react with water. Ultramafic rocks, rich in iron and magnesium, undergo serpentinization readily and release hydrogen, which, as we have discussed, is an important energy source. More silica-rich rocks react differently and release a different suite of elements. The plume data from Enceladus is most consistent with an ultramafic or mafic rocky interior, which bodes well for serpentinization and hydrogen production. The composition of Europa's rocky interior is less well constrained, though it is broadly expected to resemble the compositions of the rocky bodies that formed in the outer solar system during the solar system's early history. We are, in a sense, learning to read the seafloor from its chemical exhaust, from the traces of its activity that rise through kilometers of water and ice and, in the case of Enceladus, spray out into space for a spacecraft to catch. It is a remote and indirect kind of reading, but it is getting more detailed with each mission and each reanalysis of existing data. The seafloor we cannot see is not silent. It is sending signals, slowly and continuously, upward through the dark water above it. We are only beginning to learn the language. Now let us draw back from these specific worlds and consider the broader picture of what ocean worlds mean for our understanding of planetary systems and the distribution of potentially habitable environments across the cosmos. Part 17. A new map of habitable space. For most of the history of astronomy, the search for habitable worlds was guided by a relatively simple picture. A star provides heat and light. A planet orbiting at the right distance has liquid water on its surface. Life develops on that surface, uses sunlight to drive its chemistry, and eventually, perhaps, develops intelligence and technology. This picture shaped everything from the design of early exoplanet surveys to the public imagination of what an inhabited world looks like. The ocean worlds of the outer solar system have not invalidated this picture. Earth is still the best example we have of a habitable world, and the surface habitable zone around a star is still a meaningful concept. But the ocean worlds have added a second picture alongside the first, one that is quieter and stranger and, potentially, far more common. In this second picture, a world does not need a star nearby. It does not need sunlight at all. It needs liquid water, which can be maintained by tidal heating or radiogenic decay. It needs a chemical energy source, which hydrothermal systems can provide. It needs the basic elements of chemistry, which appear to be widely distributed throughout the solar system and, by reasonable inference, throughout planetary systems generally. And it needs time, which the cosmos provides in abundance. This second picture expands the map of habitable space in ways that are still being worked out. Within our own solar system, the number of potentially habitable environments jumps from one Earth's surface to at least 4 or 5, and possibly more. Across the galaxy, the implications are larger. Every gas giant planet with large moons is a potential host for one or more ocean worlds. Every binary star system, every red dwarf star system where planets orbit close and experience tidal heating, every rogue planet drifting without a star at all of these become candidates for consideration in a way they were not before. Rogue planets are worth a brief pause. These are planetary mass objects that have been ejected from their parent star systems and drift through the galaxy unbound to any star. They are thought to be common, possibly outnumbering stars in the galaxy. A sufficiently large rogue planet, with a rocky interior rich in radioactive elements, could maintain a subsurface ocean through radiogenic heating alone for billions of years, with no star required at all. The surface would be cold and dark and airless, but the interior could be warm and wet. This remains a speculative scenario, since we cannot currently characterize the interiors of rogue planets, but the physics permits it, and the numbers suggest there may be many such objects. The concept of a galactic habitable zone, a region of the galaxy where conditions are most favorable for complex life, has been discussed in astrobiology for some time. The traditional formulation focused on regions not too close to the galactic center, where radiation and gravitational disruptions are intense, and not too far from it, where heavy elements needed for rocky planets and biological chemistry are less abundant. Subsurface ocean worlds complicate and enrich this concept. Because they are shielded from external radiation by their ice shells, they may be habitable in regions of the galaxy where surface life would be impossible. The galactic habitable zone for subsurface ocean life might be broader than the zone for surface life. The timescale dimension of habitability also shifts when ocean worlds are included. A star like our Sun has a main sequence lifetime of about 10 billion years, after which it expands and eventually becomes inhospitable to life on nearby planets. But a moon with a subsurface ocean, if it maintains its tidal heating and its ocean over that entire period, has the same 10 billion years of potential habitability. And if the moon belongs to a smaller, cooler star, which can last much longer than our Sun, the potential window extends further still. Conversely, the early period of a planetary system, when impacts are frequent and surfaces are being sterilized repeatedly, may be less disruptive to subsurface ocean life than to surface life, since the ice shell provides insulation and shielding. Ocean worlds may be more robust to the hazards of early planetary system history. There is also a thoughtful point to be made about the relationship between the prevalence of habitable environments and the prevalence of life. Even if habitable environments are common, that does not guarantee that life arises in all of them, or in any particular one. The origin of life is still not fully understood, even for Earth. We do not know whether it requires specific chemical conditions that may be rare, or whether it is a robust outcome of any sufficiently complex aqueous chemistry given enough time and energy. This uncertainty means that a galaxy full of habitable ocean worlds might still be sparsely inhabited, or it might be broadly inhabited, and we cannot currently distinguish between these possibilities from first principles. What we can say is that the question is now more open, and the potential answer more interesting than it was before Voyager and Galileo and Cassini taught us to read the signals of hidden oceans. The map of habitable space has grown. The edges of the map have moved outward, and the territory beyond the edges, which is always larger than any map, remains to be explored. There is something in that unresolved openness that is neither frustrating nor alarming. It is simply the honest state of a science that is asking the right questions and has not yet had time to find all the answers. The questions themselves are worth holding, quietly, as we settle further into the thought of all those dark and liquid places, scattered across the solar system and, perhaps, across the galaxy, waiting patiently in the cold and the dark for whatever comes next. Part 18. The Patience of Scientific Inquiry. There is a particular quality to the science being done around ocean worlds that sets it apart from many other fields of inquiry. It is not just that the objects of study are distant, though they are. It is not just that the questions being asked are large, though they are. It is that the entire enterprise operates on timescales that require a kind of institutional patience that is genuinely unusual in human endeavors. Consider the arc of Europa science alone. The first close images of Europa were returned by Voyager 2 in 1979. The cracked, young surface prompted speculation about what lay beneath, but the instruments available were not capable of answering that question. The Galileo spacecraft was launched in 1989 and arrived at Jupiter in 1995, conducting its Europa flybys through the late 1990s and gathering the magnetic induction and gravity data that made the subsurface ocean case compelling. Scientists who began working on Europa in 1979 waited 20 years before the evidence became convincing. Europa Clipper, which will transform that evidence into detailed characterization, launched in 2024 and will arrive at Jupiter in 2030. Its mission will run through the mid-2030s. Scientists who began their careers working on Europa Clipper's science goals in the early 2000s may be approaching retirement by the time the richest data is returned and analyzed. This is not a complaint. It is simply a description of what patient science looks like when the objects of study are hundreds of millions of kilometers away and the questions being asked are among the most significant in the history of human inquiry. The people doing this work understand the timescales, and they proceed anyway, motivated by the questions themselves rather than by the prospect of quick answers. There is an analogy here to the pace of the natural world. The oceans of Europa and Enceladus have existed, probably, for hundreds of millions of years. If life arose in them, it has had that same span of time to develop. The geological processes that drive their chemistry operate on timescales of millions of years. Against that backdrop, the decades required to design and fly a mission are not a long time at all. The science is simply moving at the pace appropriate to its subject. This patience extends to the way results are interpreted and communicated. The announcements of plume detections, salt identifications, phosphate discoveries, and carbon dioxide signatures have each been careful and qualified, accompanied by discussion of alternative explanations and acknowledgement of uncertainties. This is not timidity. It is the appropriate behavior of a scientific community that understands the weight of the questions being asked and the standards of evidence required to answer them responsibly. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the community working on ocean worlds is disciplined about the distinction between what the data shows and what the data might eventually suggest. The public communication of this science has, for the most part, reflected that same care. Press releases and published papers have consistently described these environments as potentially habitable rather than inhabited, as containing the ingredients for life rather than life itself, as suggestive rather than conclusive. This caution is sometimes perceived as underwhelming by audiences hoping for more dramatic announcement, but it is precisely the right approach for questions of this magnitude. The goal is to get the answer right, not to get it first or loudest. Within this patient enterprise, there are moments of genuine acceleration. The Cassini mission's extended operations at Saturn allowed for multiple close Enceladus flybys over more than a decade, each one adding detail to the picture. The reanalysis of Cassini data years after the mission ended continues to yield new findings, including the phosphate detection announced in 2023. The James Webb Space Telescope's observations of Europa were not part of the original science case for that observatory, but its capabilities turned out to be relevant, and the carbon dioxide detection followed. Science proceeds in these incremental steps, each one building on the last, the picture sharpening slowly and steadily. The next acceleration will come from Europa Clipper, whose 50 or more flybys will return data at a rate and resolution that will transform the field. After that, whatever mission follows, whether a Europa lander or an Enceladus orbiter, will bring another step change in resolution. Each mission asks and answers the questions necessary to design the next one. The path is long, but it is navigable, and the direction is clear. The patience required of scientists in this field is not passive. It is active and purposeful, applied to problems that are advancing even when they appear to be standing still. The questions asked in 1979 are being answered in the 2030s, and the answers will generate new questions that will be answered in the 2050s or beyond. This is simply how the deepest questions get addressed. Slowly, carefully, with accumulating certainty, in the fullness of time. And the ocean worlds, unhurried and ancient, will be there whenever we arrive. The science of patience leads naturally to a different kind of reflection, one about how we as people relate to vast scales of time and space, and what it feels like to contemplate them from the small and quiet vantage point of a single night. Part 19. Resting at the edge of the known. There are moments, in the middle of a quiet night, when the scale of things becomes briefly perceptible. Not overwhelming, not frightening, just present. A sense that the world extends outward in all directions without limit, that the darkness above contains more than can be counted or named, and that this abundance is simply the normal condition of the universe, available to anyone who pauses long enough to notice it. The ocean worlds of the outer solar system are very far away. Even at the speed of light, a signal takes about 43 minutes to travel from Earth to Jupiter, and Enceladus is further still, orbiting Saturn at nearly twice Jupiter's distance from the Sun. These are distances that do not reduce to human intuition. They can be stated as numbers but not truly felt in the way that the distance to a neighboring town or a mountain on the horizon can be felt. And yet, in another sense, these worlds are present right now. The plumes of Enceladus are erupting at this moment, spraying water vapor and organic molecules into space regardless of whether anyone is watching. The ocean beneath Europa's ice is circulating in the dark, its chemistry proceeding at its own pace, indifferent to observation. The ice shells are flexing with each orbit, the tidal forces squeezing and releasing in a rhythm that has continued since long before there were eyes to notice it. There is something calming in that ongoing, unobserved activity. The universe does not perform for us. It simply proceeds, following its own rules at its own pace, and we observe what we can from where we are. The hidden oceans are hidden not because they are concealing anything, but simply because they are far away and covered in ice. They are not mysterious in any mystical sense. They are physical environments operating according to well-understood principles, and our ability to understand those principles well enough to infer the ocean's existence from billions of kilometers away is itself a remarkable thing. The scientific story of ocean worlds is also, in a quieter key, a story about human curiosity and what it is capable of when given time and resources and the freedom to follow questions wherever they lead. Nobody predicted Enceladus's plumes before Cassini found them. Nobody was certain Europa had a global ocean before the magnetic induction data came in. The discoveries arrived because people built instruments and pointed them at places that seemed worth looking at, and the universe rewarded the attention with answers more interesting than the questions that prompted them. This is a pattern that repeats throughout the history of science. The most significant discoveries tend to be the unexpected ones, the answers that arrive in a form nobody anticipated and that open new questions rather than closing old ones. The subsurface oceans of the outer solar system fit this pattern precisely. They were not the target of the missions that found them. They were surprises, disclosed by data gathered for other purposes, recognized by scientists attentive enough to notice what the numbers were actually saying. That attentiveness, applied patiently over decades, is what has given us the picture we now have. And the picture is, by any measure, extraordinary. A solar system containing multiple liquid water oceans, active hydrothermal chemistry, organic molecules, and at least one environment where every major ingredient for life appears to be present. All of this beyond the classical habitable zone, in places that were considered frozen and inert within living memory. Sitting with that picture, without rushing to conclusions, without demanding that it resolve into a single simple answer, is its own kind of pleasure. The not knowing is not a failure. It is the honest condition of being at the edge of what is currently understood, which is exactly where the most interesting questions live. The ocean beneath the ice does not need us to know about it to be real. It was there before we were, and it will be there after the current generation of missions has completed its work and the next generation is being planned. Our knowing about it changes nothing about the ocean. It changes something about us, something about what we understand our place in the universe to be, something about the size of the inhabited or potentially inhabited cosmos we find ourselves a part of. And that change, quiet as it is worth the long patience of the science that produced it. Now, as we come to the end of this long and gentle journey through ice and dark water, let us gather the threads together and let them rest. Part 20. The Dark Water and What We Carry Forward. We began in a simple place. The idea that oceans could exist in the dark, far from the sun, beneath kilometers of ice, in worlds that look from the outside like frozen, lifeless spheres. It seemed, at first, like an unlikely premise. By now it should feel like a natural one. The evidence is real and it is substantial. Magnetic induction signatures pointing to global liquid layers beneath the ice of Europa, Ganymede, and others. Gravity data consistent with differentiated interiors, dense rock below and lighter water in between. The plumes of Enceladus, erupting continuously, carrying water, organics, silica, hydrogen, and phosphate from an ocean that sits in contact with a warm and chemically active seafloor. Surface geology recording the history of forces from below. Spectroscopic detections of salts and carbon compounds that appear to originate in the ocean and reach the surface through exchange processes that are still operating today. Each of these lines of evidence was gathered by different instruments, using different physical principles, during different missions spanning more than 4 decades of exploration. They agree. That agreement is the foundation on which everything else rests. The mechanisms that keep these oceans liquid are well understood. Tidal heating, driven by orbital resonances that squeeze and flex the moons in rhythmic cycles. Radiogenic heating from the decay of long-lived radioactive elements in the rocky cores. Antifreeze chemistry from dissolved salts that lower the freezing point of the water. Insulation provided by the ice shell above. These are not exotic processes. They are the normal physics of planetary bodies, operating in the outer solar system at conditions different from Earth's but not beyond our understanding. The chemistry within these oceans appears to include, at minimum, liquid water, dissolved salts, organic carbon compounds, molecular hydrogen, nitrogen-bearing molecules, sulfur compounds, and phosphate. The energy gradient between hydrogen-rich vent fluid and more oxidized ocean water provides a sustained source of chemical energy analogous to what drives chemosynthetic communities on Earth's seafloor. The temperature, pressure, and pH conditions within these oceans fall within the range that extremophilic life on Earth can tolerate. Whether the conditions are also sufficient for the origin of life, which is a separate and harder question, remains genuinely open. The broader context of these findings has reshaped our understanding of where habitable environments might exist in the universe. The classical habitable zone around a star remains a useful concept for surface life, but the ocean worlds demonstrate that liquid water and chemical energy can be sustained in bodies far outside this zone, heated from within rather than from without. This means that the number of potentially habitable environments in any planetary system may be much larger than the classical picture suggested. And across the galaxy the implications of that expansion are considerable. We have looked at Earth's own deep ocean and deep biosphere for guidance, and we have found it. Hydrothermal vent communities thriving without sunlight. Subglacial lake ecosystems isolated from the surface for tens of millions of years. Microorganisms metabolizing in rock kilometers below the seafloor at rates so slow they barely register. These are not imagined scenarios. They are documented, studied, and understood well enough to serve as genuine reference points for what might be possible in the outer solar system. We have considered the missions, past and future, that are building this knowledge. Voyager, Galileo, Cassini, New Horizons, Hubble, James Webb. Europa Clipper, already traveling. JUICE, already traveling. Dragonfly, in development. The Enceladus Orbolander, studied and recommended, awaiting its moment. Each one a step, each one adding resolution to a picture that was blurry not long ago and is becoming clearer with each passing year. We have held the question of what it would mean to find life in one of these oceans, and we have tried to hold it honestly. Not with false certainty in either direction, not with drama, but with the quiet acknowledgement that the possibility is real, that the implications are large, and that the discovery, if it comes, will arrive gradually and will deserve to be understood gradually. We have noted, with appropriate caution, the peripheral questions raised by unidentified phenomena observed in our own atmosphere, and we have placed them in their proper context, evidence of our ongoing uncertainty about the full nature of the world we inhabit, rather than evidence of any specific conclusion. And we have rested, from time to time, in the simple image of what these places are. Dark oceans, cold and deep, covered in ancient ice, circulating in silence at the edge of the solar system. Chemistry proceeding without observation. Heat rising from rocky seafloors. Water carrying dissolved minerals upward through the dark. The whole quiet system maintained by nothing more than gravity and physics, running on a schedule set by orbital mechanics and the slow decay of radioactive elements, indifferent to whether anyone is watching and entirely untroubled by the distance between it and us. There is a kind of peace in that image. Not the peace of resolution, since the questions remain open, but the peace of a universe that is simply very large and very old and very full of processes that operate at their own pace regardless of what we know or do not know about them. The hidden oceans will be there next year and in 100 years and long after any particular generation of scientists or missions or questions has passed. Their patience is geological. Ours does not need to match it. It only needs to be enough to keep looking, carefully and honestly, for as long as we are here to look. The dark water holds its secrets gently. We are learning, slowly, to ask the right questions. And that, for now, is enough.